Welcome back, everyone, for another installment of Gardens and Grub here in beautiful Durham, North Carolina. We're going to talk for about 20 minutes about a delicious ingredient that most of you have had before, and then we will open it up for questions. So feel free to raise your hand or write in the chat box in Zoom, or, well, since we're not on Facebook, never mind. So today we're going to talk about one of my favorite warming spices, nutmeg. So this is a whole nutmeg, and it's hard as a little tiny rock. It's hard. So this beautiful, delicious plant, if you've ever had a pumpkin spice latte, you've had nutmeg. Nutmeg is the primary spice flavor in eggnog. In any kind of pumpkin pie spice, if you've ever had like an old-fashioned cake donut, it's nutmeg flavored. Nutmeg is delicious. It's one of the oldest cultivated spices that we know of before it moved all around the world, which that's quite a story. But this is part of the fruit we're going to talk about today. We're also going to talk about mace. So nutmeg and mace. Mace is the Ariel that develops on the outside. So this is a nutmeg fruit. And so they crack the hull on the outside, and then the nutmeg, this part, is on the inside, and the Ariel, which is like a miniature, almost like a vestigial fruit, these little blades develop on the outside. They're bright red, they're gorgeous, and then they dry out over a couple of weeks of a period, and then you get this dry, crunchy bit. It doesn't look appetizing, but ooh, it smells so good. Mace is considerably more expensive than nutmeg because you get more nutmeg out of each nut than you do mace. So this spice, of course, it grows in the Spice Islands, which it's native to Indonesia. So there are these little islands in Indonesia that grow lots of different kinds of tropical spices, but the Banda Islands are where mace and nutmeg are native to. This is like delicious and warming, but you definitely want to make sure that if you can, buy this whole and then grate it, because you're going to get a lot more delicious flavor out of this if you grind it yourself. So you're not going to put this in a blender or a spice grinder. You are going to use a nutmeg grinder. So this is something I use. It's a microplane. You don't have to buy the name brand one. And it's this really fine grater. Now they actually make graters that are specifically for nutmeg, but I'm one of those people that in my kitchen, I don't like to have one thing that just does one job. I need it to do lots and lots of things because I live in a really small house, and I don't want to have too many things around my kitchen that only have one job. So this can actually grate nutmeg. It can grate hard cheeses, lemon zest, ginger, turmeric, and it's a great little kitchen tool to have. They're like between $12 and $15, and they have this little kind of grate on it, of course. This actually is adapted from a carpentry tool that they use. They actually used to use microplanes for wood, and they still do when you're shaping wood, fine carvings and things. But you can actually also use them for all of those other tools, all of those other applications we talked about if you get the kitchen one. So to grate nutmeg, you're going to take your microplane and you're going to just grate it, and it smells terrific. It doesn't smell like anything until you grate it. Well, it went away. Let me get another one here. Good thing I have my little jar of nutmegs. This is how you want to store nutmeg, and you want to store mace in a jar. So you can often get, you don't have to go to like necessarily an Indonesian grocery store to get this, because it's a tropical plant that has been moved across the world to other tropical areas. You can get nutmeg and mace. A lot of nutmeg is now grown in Guatemala. A lot of it is grown in India, in tropical regions of India. So you can get nutmeg and mace at Indian grocery stores as well. And that's usually where you're going to find it, or other international international grocery stores that serve like a South American or Mexican population, a Latinx population, you can get 10 nutmeg for a couple of bucks in those little bags. They're kind of like little, they're usually a couple of dollars, and they're hanging in the aisle on the little pegs. That's how you want to buy it. And then bring it home and put it in a jar, and this will last for years. I've heard 4 to 6 years, but I've used 10-year-old nutmeg that's whole like this, and it works great. So you can grate it as you need it, or like in the case of when I do Thanksgiving cooking, I cook for days, where, you know, I prep all my stuff a couple of days ahead and brine my turkey. Then the day prior, I do all my pies and cakes and dessert type things and prep all the vegetables for the next day. And then on the actual day of Thanksgiving, I will kind of cook everything, you know, the breads and all that kind of stuff and the turkey, so that I've got like multiple days of prep on that, because I do everything from scratch. You don't have to do that, but I love it. Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday. And nutmeg is a big part of that. So what I'll usually do is a couple of days before I'm going to use everything, I'll go ahead and grind a bunch of nutmeg. So I just have it in a dish, or I'll grind all of my cinnamon and ginger and all the things that I'm going to use, and then I'll just put them in little containers in the refrigerator to keep them nice and fresh. And then I have sort of ground nutmeg ready to use, and I don't have to find my grinder and all of that right when I'm making a cake if I'm going to put it in like different applications for that. But if you buy pre-ground nutmeg and mace, or any spice for that matter, if you've watched any of these shows before, you know I'm always grinding things fresh. And the reason that I do that is they last longer when you buy them. You know, you buy some of these, they'll last for decades. I can use, you know, this one package of nutmeg will, you know, I use it a lot more, but you could pull out the same nutmeg from the year prior, Christmas and Thanksgiving or holiday season, and it's still good. Whereas nutmeg that's already ground or mace that's already ground is not going to have the flavor anymore that it did, because these allspices have essential oils in them that are oxidizable by light and air. So once you break them up and you kind of increase their surface area by blending them into a powder, and you expose their particles to air, the flavors oxidize and it doesn't really taste that great anymore. Plus, if you buy pre-ground spices, you don't always know how long they've been there. And sometimes, especially in the case of mace and nutmeg, because it's such an expensive spice, sometimes it can be adulterated with other things. We talked about this in the turmeric episode. You have to be really careful where you get things. If you buy a whole nutmeg, you know it's a nutmeg. But if you buy it ground, you don't know if there's been other things added to it to stretch it. And this does happen sometimes with nutmeg. There are other trees in this genus, not the same species, but Mysterica is the genus of this tree. They'll get some other ones that aren't normally used for spices, and they'll grate it and just kind of stretch the nutmeg so that they can make more money off of it, because those other ones aren't really used for spice. So this is always the best way, is to do whole seed spices, and they're not expensive. Just don't buy them in the spice aisle in the little glass jar, because if you do, it'll cost you like $10 for 3 nutmeg, but you can get twice that many for $2 if you go to the stores that, like international grocery stores. A lot of those places, you don't really see the spice aisle with the glass jars like in America, like in American cuisines. You actually find a lot of things in bags in bulk. So when you can get an entire half a pound of nutmeg for $10 at a grocery store that serves an Indian population, it's a much better way to go. So it costs less and lasts longer and tastes better. So, and you know it's not adulterated. So a little bit about nutmeg and the amount to eat. So nutmeg is delicious and harmless to consume if you're eating it in the amounts that that you would use to spice something. So you're going to do a little shake on your pumpkin spice latte, or you're going to do a little shake of it or a teaspoon of it in a whole thing of eggnog, or you're going to put a 1/4 teaspoon of it in, as like a flavor potentiator in like a meat pie or something like that. And that's fine and harmless, but do not under any circumstances take a bottle of nutmeg and try to eat it. In fact, there are a few nutmeg poisonings per year among children and dogs, because they'll get a hold of a container of nutmeg and try to eat the whole thing, which it tastes terrible in that amount, I'm sure. I don't know that it would be delicious, but it's actually poisonous if you try to eat that much nutmeg. It's also a hallucinogenic, so it will make you see things and also make you very sick. It can also cause organ failure if you're eating it in large amounts. So this is not something that you want to do. So keep it out of the hands of children and pets and curious teenagers. Don't do it. It's not worth it. It will make you very, very ill. Also, it causes, if you eat it in large amounts, it can actually cause contractions of the uterus. And so there are even some pregnant women who avoid nutmeg altogether during their pregnancy. There's no medical necessity for that, but who knows, you know, if your doctor tells you don't eat nutmeg, then don't eat nutmeg. However, if you're eating it in very small amounts, the amount, you know, a teaspoon per whole cake, there's not enough there to cause any problems at all. So we were talking a little bit about nutmeg grinders, okay? Oh, by the way, you would grind mace with a spice grinder. So I just have this in my spice kit at home. It looks like a coffee grinder. These are cheap. They're like 20 bucks. And no particular brand matters. I just get the cheap one because I'm using it for spices. Do not try to grind your nutmeg in here. You will bend. You will bend and break the blades in here, but you can grind things like mace and cinnamon and whole seed cumin and coriander and things like that. You can grind in here, and then you just wipe it out and then put it back and then just pull it out and use it. Just don't try to use your coffee grinder. Nutmeg would be, I'm sorry, mace would be delicious if you had a little residue of mace and then you ground coffee in it. But if you were grinding, like, say, cumin or coriander, and there was a little bit of residue in there and you try to make coffee out of that, it'd be a little bit strange. So I just have this separately. It'll last forever because, you know, I use it, but it's not, I use my coffee grinder every day, sometimes multiple times throughout the day. But this I only use maybe once a week, once every couple of weeks. And then I just dust it out, and, you know, it's just one thing that you can have, even though technically it has one job. It's a necessity to have it just for that job so that I don't have cumin flavored coffee. So that's what you would use to grind these two different things. Now, back in the day, we're going to talk about the Banda Islands and how nutmeg was spread across the world. But before then, I want to go just a little bit back in time to the Victorian times, which is the mid 1800s. And actually, people used to carry around, it was gentlemen that would, of the higher classes, would carry around these little containers that you could keep a nutmeg in, and inside of them there was a grater. And the reason being is it became fashionable once especially the British took control of the Banda Islands from the Dutch. Nutmeg was a sort of luxury item. And so you could carry this around in your pocket with a nutmeg in it. And when you were at a party, you could grate some nutmeg and put it in your punch. Now, I have a feeling that they were probably grating a little bit more than you would normally be using in, say, a cake or something, because apparently it gave you like a floaty feeling. So they would grate some, share it with a lady fair, and then they'd pop it back in their pocket. This one is made of sterling silver from 1861, and it sold for over $2,500 from an antique store in Great Britain. I told my husband that if I ever hit the lotto, I don't need a new house and I don't need a new car or fancy jewelry, but this is the kind of stuff I would buy if I had money to burn, because isn't that beautiful? I mean, it's handmade, and plus I love sterling silver. There's just something about it that's so, to me, like, special. And I have a platinum wedding ring, but everything else I wear is sterling silver. I just love it. It's so easy to clean and it's so strong, and you can do really beautiful, like, fluting work with it. Anyway, this is how I'd waste my money if I could light $50 bills on fire. So I had to show you that. Now, the history, it's always the history that complicates things. Nutmeg, because it was in the Banda Islands that it was grown, and these are tiny little islands in Indonesia, the Arabic speaking peoples found where this was grown in like the 6th century AD. So they would buy from the Banda people or trade, and then they were the only ones, they had like not control of the spice trade there, but they actually traded with the people and actually brought nutmeg to to the world in general to start with. And so, but they kept the location of the islands a like tight secret, because they did not want European traders, as European traders are wont to do, to go there and take over and dominate the trade. But right around the mid 1500s is when Europeans did find it. And initially they did trade with the Bandanese people. And then around the early 1600s, the Dutch, was it the Dutch, some Dutch trading company, I can't remember the name of it now, which is still around, by the way. They actually went there and waged a war, unfortunately, and there were about 15,000 people on the Banda Islands, and they knocked that population down to like 1,000 people. And then they dominated the spice trade. So they put plantations everywhere, because the nutmeg was so rare, and that was the only place that you could grow it. So in fact, when the seeds would leave the island, they would dip them in lye, not lime, but lye, like the stuff you make soap out of, so that you couldn't sprout them elsewhere. So they could be taken somewhere and processed, but that the seeds would never germinate, so that you could start plantations elsewhere. So they really dominated that until the Napoleonic Wars. And then there was, during the Napoleonic Wars, there was a gap of time where they weren't able to kind of keep control of things, because they were, you know, spending a lot of their time, money and energy and people fighting Napoleonic Wars. And so the British stepped in and took over. So Great Britain had control of these Banda Islands, and what they did while they had control was they shipped out trees and soil to all over the place that they could be able to grow them in tropical regions like Jamaica, Sri Lanka, Grenada, all of these different places that they had control of through their own sort of plundering efforts, where they would take over, and it was for resources. And so they spread this crop all over. What I thought was an interesting tidbit of history is that Manhattan used to be in the hands of the Dutch, and it was because of the Banda Islands and the nutmeg trade that, in order to get the Banda Islands back, the Dutch turned Manhattan over to the British. And because of that, New York is called Manhattan, and the Bronx and Brooklyn rather than New Amsterdam. So that was an interesting little tidbit that I thought, wow, because of, you know, these two little spices here, it's Manhattan instead of New Amsterdam. So I thought that was absolutely fascinating. One last little thing, the Ariel, this red Ariel that we're talking about, is like a fruit-like structure, and it actually attaches at this little kind of stem end and wraps all around here, and then it's separated. So the difference between an Ariel and a fruit, an Ariel is sort of like a much thinner, it attaches here, and it's a much smaller amount. So something like a pomegranate seed, that's a good example of an Ariel that you've eaten, where the seed is on the inside, but there's this little bit of fruit on the outside, but the fruit, the actual whole body of the fruit has a peel on it, and then you have these Ariels around little seeds. So that's how it's grown. And we are about out of time for information about nutmeg. Why don't we go ahead and open it up for some questions about nutmeg and mace, or anything else, questions that you have about food.
Thank you, Sherilyn. So we are finally live on Facebook. So just FYI, we're out there after all that time. So our first question is, could you explain a little more in depth what the difference is between the taste of mace and nutmeg, and how you would use each of them in your cooking?
Great question. So nutmeg, I can't remember what language it's from, but it actually means musky nut. And it does have like an earthy, warming, a little like a sweet musk smell. And it's not quite as pungent as mace. So mace, it has, it's really pungent for the amount of stuff that's here, but it actually contains safrole, which is an active component in saffron. It also has like more of a brightness and a citrusiness to it than nutmeg. They are interchangeable in recipes. If something requests mace, Usually it's going to request mace and nutmeg at the same time. You can substitute nutmeg for mace, but if something asks for nutmeg and you only have mace, use about half to 3/4 as much because it's pretty powerful. But they are kind of interchangeable in recipes, but mace does have its own distinct flavor that's lighter and brighter than the muskiness of a nutmeg. So.
All right, our next question is, can you share us your favorite recipe for using nutmeg or mace?
Okay, so, well, there's a couple. We did the auntie's chai, and that uses nutmeg. That's one of my favorite recipes to put nutmeg in, and mace. But my favorite cake to make and to eat is a carrot cake. I love The Joy of Cooking is a great book to have because it has a little bit of everything in it. And they have a recipe for carrot cake in there that gives you all of these, like the recipe on its own is great. And it gives you a lot of additives that you can put in there, like pineapple and coconut and nuts and raisins. I put all of them in there. Really, the carrot cake that I make has so many fruits and vegetables in it, glued together with just enough eggs and sugar. And I use like all brown sugar instead of white sugar. So it's like the most flavorful cake. And I use nutmeg and mace and fresh grated ginger and fresh ground cinnamon. I use all of those in there. And it really is like the most complex flavor. And also I don't mind eating it because it's packed with fruits and vegetables. I do like a little cream cheese icing on there, but I use really high quality cream cheese and Irish butter. And it like, that's only just a little bit. I would rather just eat the cake with nothing on it. So that's my favorite recipe, but you can put it in anything where you'd want a warming spice. Try sprinkling some of it in your coffee in the morning. It's great.
So you spoke a little bit about some of the hallucinogenic characteristics of the nutmeg. Are there other health benefits that we should know about?
Currently, no. So yes, the spice is used in Ayurveda because it has been used for hundreds of years in India and is grown there quite a bit now. So but when it comes to like our modern Western medicine, there are not any like there's no evidence to support any kind of health benefits, but there are definitely some health detriments if you take a bunch of it. So they're not using, I know that also like at least they do use it in cosmetics. Like you can get nutmeg butter. It's about $185 to $100 a pound. You can use it in small amounts, but if you just take like nutmeg butter and spread it on your skin, it can cause skin irritation and breakouts and things. It can cause an allergic reaction because it's just so powerful. So usually they recommend that you mix just a small amount of it into, your super fatting for your soaps or candles or, topical application, but that you don't put it on there just straight because it's such a powerful, it's got so many like active psychoactive, does have psychoactive oils in it, but it also just have like chemically active things in it. So you use it in small amounts. Yeah, but otherwise, no, there's nothing that says like, you take nutmeg and it lowers your blood pressure or anything like that. No, currently anyway.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, are there any other spices that have these same kind of hallucinogenic characteristics that you described?
Not that I know of when I'm thinking about it. I mean, not like this. I mean, you eat a Carolina Reaper pepper and you will see, your chosen deity in your rearview mirror, I'm sure. That's very spicy but it's different. It's a totally different mechanism. So I don't know of any that I can think of. I mean, I know that like the Anarchist Cookbook talked about smoking banana peels or something, which is completely crazy. I almost said bananas. It is bananas. But I don't know of any spice that causes like, literally that you're going to hallucinate if you take too much of it, but that people eat every day and they drink every day, but it's in very small amounts. It makes me think like, who got a hold of a container of nutmeg and ate the whole thing just to see what would happen? But people have, and it's not a good idea. I know there's teenagers on this call and I know that you want to run out and do anything that people tell you not to do, but trust me, it will not be worth it for you. It'll be painful. It causes body pain. I read all about it. It's a mess. So yeah, so just be really careful and just use it in small amounts, and it's delicious and gorgeous and amazing.
And then we have a comment, of course, something I can't say. Psilocybin mushrooms are hallucinogenic.
Yeah. Psilocybin mushrooms are magic mushrooms. They're not really something that we have in food. They're not generally recognized as safe by the FDA, and they are, you know, still illegal, at least in this, you know, in our United States. That fungus grows on poo. It's a secondary decomposer, so it's a secondary saprophyte. So yes, it's true that will cause you to hallucinate, but you're not going to find it at a shaker at Starbucks so you can add to the top of your cappuccino. But yeah.
Or does it sound that appetizing?
No. But it does cause vomiting, just like nutmeg does. You know, that's fun for everyone.
Great.
Lord help us.
Well, I think our next question is moving on from the mushrooms. It's the usual. What should we be doing in the garden right now, Sherilyn?
Summer. The summer crops. It's not summer yet, but it's going to start feeling like it real soon. And right now, soil temperatures are perfect for anything that creates a fruit. So the rule of thumb when people ask, what should I be planting? And generally speaking, summer is for fruits and fall and spring are for roots, shoots, and leaves. And so fruits are what you'd be planting, and anything, a fruit is anything with a seed in it. So like eggplants, peppers, tomatoes, gooseberries, tomatillos, what am I forgetting? I mean, anything that's going to give you something with seeds on the inside, because fruits are very expensive for plants to make, and they need a lot of sunlight. And now is when we have like the longest time of sunlight and the most intense sunlight. So that's why you can actually generate. You know, that's why tomatoes and things don't grow well in the shade. You might be able to get a couple of cherry tomatoes, but you try to get one of those big pineapple tomato fruits. There's actually a tomato called a pineapple tomato, and it's like 1.33 pounds. They're gigantic, and they have crazy cat-faced tops on them, and they're wonderful. You'll never get that with a shade garden. You just won't really get it. So, so yeah, tomatoes, peppers, all the favorite things.
Awesome. Well, unless anyone wants to raise their hand, I think we are out of questions and just about out of time.
Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for coming. It was great. And we will see you next week.
Awesome. See y'all next week. Thanks, Sherilyn.
Bye.